The Gauntlet is one of the most daunting PoE experiences you'll ever try. The mod list is incredibly intimidating, and most people aren't ready for an event like this. While there are a ton of PoE players that are more experienced, more mechanically skilled, and even more creative than myself, I think only a small handful, if that, have better race results than me since I started playing HC on and off back in 3.16. And while I think this is mostly due to luck, this is also partly due to a slightly more focused approach to racing. In this video, I really want to detail how I view the Gauntlet and SFHC racing in general, the steps that I'll be taking, the thought process as I'm going through each stage, how to goal set, and what I really see as a successful event. Just in case this Gauntlet plan fails though, I've got boot.dev, one of the smartest ways to master your backend development by tackling the hardest problem with e-learning: boredom. Boot.dev is a platform that's sort of a gamification of learning how to do back-end code, and it takes you from a journey from start to finish in both Python and Go programming languages. Having struggled immensely while doing my PhD, I realized that one of the most important things to think about while you're doing any sort of learning is to ensure that you're never bored. And boot.dev is completely designed to be this way. It's meant to be fully online, self-paced, and kind of feels like you're playing a pretty engaging type of game. Now, the platform is designed to get you writing a ton of code right away, and having seen what the developer lifestyle looks like these days, offering a lot of flexibility, and obviously decent compensation if it already isn't extremely obvious, I think this sort of career pivot can be really great for anybody. Boot.dev also offers a 30-day no questions asked refund policy, a free demo of every course, and a demonstration of interactive features on these courses. So if this interests you at all, make sure you click the link in the description box, use my code to get 25% off your first month, or even your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. As far as events like Gauntlet go, the first place to start is actually the end: bossing. Now, I think there's four main lines of thinking as far as ascendancies I can possibly clear. The first is a trickster using ephemeral edge. Secondly, there's Juggernaut stacking, a ton of defenses, maybe endurance charge, but hitting things with a stick. The third is a Slayer with a different kind of stick, but also hitting quite hard. And then finally, you have Hierophant, Ice Nova, Archmage. Those are sort of the four main sets that I would think are generally viable as far as possible to clear this event without knowing everything that's going on. Of those ascendancies though, I do think Trickster is probably the strongest, probably the de facto tankiest SFHC build in the game right now, and conveniently it's also the build that I know the progression the best, so it's probably the ascendancy and build that I'll be choosing to play for this event. As far as progression goes, you're generally starting out with Locust Mines, Power Siphon, and then eventually farming out for Ephemeral Edge build. So having spec'd out the sort of general build, I then want to look at each individual piece of gear that I want to have for the build, assuming that it is viable, make a mental note of how I want to farm each one, write that down, generally spec out a final atlas, and just have ideas about that, but then I shelve that away. After that, I usually then start thinking about the campaign. Now, regularly, I'm thinking mostly about speed during campaign, things like, Armageddon Brand Cremation. When I'm doing caster leveling, there's like Rolling Magma stuff. On attack-based builds, there's a ton of variety, sometimes they even go Helix. But in Gauntlet, I think this drastically changes for campaign builds. The number one consideration that I actually have this time is playstyle. I want, especially in the early part of the campaign, a highly flexible build that's able to dodge skills effectively, hit things without too great of an animation windup, and have opportunities for simple scaling at core points in the game. So for me, these are Act 4 right before the Trinity, Act 7 before Temple of Decay, Act 8 before the Sisters, and then Act 9 right before Trinity again. I see these as usually the most likely places for me to rip during the campaign for various reasons. So starting out, I'll probably actually be playing Cobra Lash on a Shadow instead of doing sort of any elemental leveling. Rolling Magma, while really strong and has great clear, great XP, I think is just like a little bit slow on the animation side of things. And Cobra Lash definitely has the damage, at least through to like level 10-ish to clear things, because these initial nodes at the start are just so incredible to give you both Fizz and Chaos damage. You're partly converting, you also have poison damage built into the gem, and you can run Chance to Poison basically for free. So Cobra Lash sort of takes this to begin with. You also have options for Blood Siphon and Trickery, which I think are both really good. At level 12 though, I will be swapping over to Poisonous Concoction, and this is probably one of the strongest skills, something I forget about sometimes, but it's really, really great with this starting tree. And you don't need to worry because regrets come by fairly easily. So I'll be taking this, grabbing down here, and then the rest of the nodes at this point actually don't matter. So I'd be probably taking things like, I don't know, pathing out here, grabbing Leech on this side, and probably holding onto this tree, not spending too many more points, because I think this tree alone, just this, can take you to docks. And if I can get to the docks, I can get to level 31, which is when I actually want to do my Locust Mine Power Siphon swap. I'll be using some of the gold that I've accumulated in King's March to do a bunch of respecs, and the respec tree will probably look something like this. Taking out this stuff, taking out this set, and then getting over here, clicking 2-point pierce, and grabbing these initial mine nodes. Now this looks a little bit bad, but you actually do need a lot of intelligence, and sometimes I take this at Thieves Craft, but I do run the int amulet from, I think, the Diala reward. At 31, I'll be swapping over to my Locust progression, and this is sort of the main build here that I'll be playing. It's basically the exact same as my League starter. I might opt for a few more life nodes here or there. I probably won't take Wind Dancer. I'm going to play really cautiously instead. And yeah, this is sort of the main build that I'll be playing throughout my progression. A couple things to note. One, you really don't want to waste too much gold. However, I think you'll have more than enough gold by the time you do your docks respec. And then after I actually swap to 31, I'll be continuing to farm docks further, getting additional gold, and then using that gold in the black market. The other thing that's really important for this build, other than the correct sockets, is that at 31, you really want to have a lot of orbs of transmutation, because these can be used for the flat benchcraft for added lightning damage on rings, amulet, gloves, and your weapon after doing piety. I will then overfarm docks even further to about level 34 to 38, somewhere in that range, depending on how I feel in my gear. And I think at that point, even at that point alone, once I have normal lab taking Swift Killer, I'll have enough damage for A4 Trinity and a really great playstyle so I don't die to Dodri. The next core farm point on this build is towards Act 5. I'm not really sure what kind of tree I'm going to click. I'm just going to do kind of freestyle. But you do want to farm Chamber of Innocence this time around for Gauntlet. You'll be looking for 2 Amethyst Rings because you need a ton of Chaos Res, or as much as you can get entering Act 6. I think if you overfarm Chamber of Innocence like level 55-ish, you'll feel really good for the second half campaign. And then entering Cruel Lab, you'll feel decent. And you will also want to put on Grace at the time you're at Chamber of Innocence. The reason this is really helpful is because, you know, zones like Temple of Decay, which is what I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like flicker spiders or mobs that start to swarm you. Having that 10k evasion or so is just absolutely insane with your Jade Flask up. After that, after getting Cruel Lab, you'll want to probably take at Cruel Lab, I think 1 step ahead is reasonable, but I'm actually going to go Escape Artist in maximum progression and skip 1 step almost the entire way through. The next farm point is actually going to be Harbor Bridge. So Blood Aqueducts is the de facto farm spot that a lot of people tend to use in FC Trade. But when I ran my 4-stone race, I saw some pretty good players die in Blood Aqueducts, and since then I think Harbor Bridge is really good. In my testing, I averaged between 300 to 400 million XP per hour in Harbor Bridge, even doing the expeditions, whatever other league mechanics as they spawn there. And I think I'm going to farm Harbor Bridge till about level 68, do my black market gambles at 68, look for a status garb, and then pretty much from the Harbor Bridge onwards, I should be ready with my current gear level at that point to do the rest of the campaign and enter tier 1 maps. The early part of map progression for this build is actually a little bit contentious. So there's a thought about skipping Betrayal almost entirely, and after playing this out, I think I do want to grab Betrayal. It's a pretty good place to get gear, and oftentimes you do need things like hybrid res crafts, hybrid attributes, that sort of thing. So on this tree, there's 3 primary mechanics I want to focus on. Firstly is Betrayal. Secondly is Kirak. I guess that's not really an additional mechanic, but I really want to get the middle Kirak wheel. This is important to keep almost all the way through at least your first 2 days, regardless of what Atlas tree you're running. You will need things like Carrot's Trial sometimes, Putrid, Obas. Having that, especially if you're going to be using recoms, is really, really big. So make sure you have that. Once I've taken this initial set, pathing up here, and then taking this stuff in the middle, I'll be grabbing the rest of the June nodes, and then actually pathing all the way out to here to grab the rest of June. From then, I'm getting Expedition as my second sort of additional Atlas mechanic, just the stuff around here. And I'll actually grab the initial Harvest Chance as well. This isn't really that great, but if you do hit, I don't know, like certain piece of gear, you might want to reforge Chaos on a ring, or you might want to reforge Defense early on a chest. So that can be quite helpful. And the last mechanic then is Harvest that I want to have on this tree. So it's a fairly standard early progression tree that you'd see a lot in SFHC. I will be skipping things like Essences, because you can get Screaming Essences from your Expedition. I was also going to go for Crop Rotation, but I think as far as this progression goes, I want to have some purple juice for fossil swaps. I want to have some blue juice for I think essence swaps and reforged defenses, and then yellow is always good for reforged chaos for early gear before you go CI. Any additional nodes I have at this point probably go towards map sustain, so like the 2%, but yeah. The second Atlas I want to be running is actually connected to that first Atlas. I think I want to stay on relatively the same Atlas, but I do want to unspec June. The reason is because I don't actually like doing June that much in red maps. Power Siphon Trickster is not squishy. It's obviously playable in the Gauntlet, but it's not tanky as other melee builds are. So when you're doing like, you know, red map Jorgen, Tora, Elrion, Haku, whatever, there's a lot of really hard-hitting Betrayal guys, and I want to be mostly done my stuff. I don't care that much about farming Grav 3, that sort of thing. So instead, I'll be looking towards 2 new mechanics. I'll be introducing Harbinger to my tree and Breach. The reason I want to do Harbinger is because as I'm doing my initial mapping, I won't be that strong yet, so I'll be doing a lot of like white or blue maps, almost rolling for nothing, and Harbinger really thrives in a low roll mechanic Atlas set. Breach, I think it's just okay. I don't like, obviously pack size density is helpful for Breach, but I think it's something I want to have. I might be angling towards Voice of the Storm because it's pretty good for Ephemeral Edge. And you know what? If you have the spare nodes, you can take it. If I feel like it's too rippy, I'll continue to just grab the 2% and things like that. At this point, it also becomes slightly important to start taking mining byproducts. This is one of the ways in which you're going to be able to access resonators. There's a lot of ways to get dense fossils. You can get it from Expedition, you can get it from the logbooks, from Tujin. Well, mostly that actually. But that alone should be able to get like probably a couple hundred fossils by the time you hit 95 or 96, and that might make up some of the core bases you might start out with for crafting the EE gear for Trickster, Ephemeral Edge. So you really want to have access to that. You might also run a little bit of Delve, that's probably what I'll be doing. You'll notice that I still have 2 atlases open. One of these atlases will be dedicated to farming a mix of Delve and Atlas bosses to get my maps for T17s, eventually getting for your Uber fragments. And the other one will likely be allocated for something to do with gold farming and also farming implicits for some of my gear, whether that's Eater or Exarch. Before I enter bosses, there was one final stage, and this is a really important one. I look and I copy what Ben is doing because it'll probably be at least a day, if not 2 or 3 days ahead of me at that time. If he's on day 5, I'm probably on day 2. I'll just copy what he's doing and then I'll walk into bosses shortly after. So you can see that even though this gauntlet seems kind of daunting, the reality is that farming for gear isn't actually that crazy. The final gearing step is just a mix of recoms, alterations, and maybe you'll hit things by just dense fossil spamming as I did last gauntlet. But I think the plan for this event is actually fairly constrained. If you're gearing up a Trickster, it looks like a fairly short progression time, and I really would not be that surprised to see at least one person possibly clearing by day 4 or day 5.